had been a pre-World War I, pre-1914 exchange rate. Each currency was pegged to gold at whatever that government chose. They would obviously try to do something that made commercial and economic sense, but you joined voluntarily and you picked your own exchange standards, so to speak. Of course, once you pegged to gold, you pegged every other currency in the world, because not everywhere, but all the major trading currencies, because they're pegged to gold also. And France and Belgium and Italy and a number of countries went back at a greatly devalued rate. They did that. It was a simple recognition of the fact that they had printed enormous amounts of money to fight the war. If you were going to go back to gold, you either had to devalue the currency to reflect the increased money supply, or you could decrease the money supply, but that would cause a recession. That's why, 1925, American expatriates were living very comfortably in Paris on relatively modest US dollar incomes, because franc was so devalued when they went back to gold. The one exception to that was the UK. And at this point, Winston Churchill, believe it or not, was chancellor of the Exchequer. It was long before he was prime minister, but he was the head of the Treasury, in effect. And he felt duty-bound and honor-bound to go back to gold at the pre-war exchange rate. They said, a deal's a deal, a contract's a contract. People had faith in paper money. Let's maintain convertibility at the old level. Well, he did that, but as I suggested, you had to cut the money supply in half to maintain the new peg. That put the UK in a depression 3 years ahead of the rest of the world. We typically are depression in the US from 1929, but the UK was well in depression as early as 1926. Finally, in 1931, they had a banking panic. They did devalue at that time. FDR devalued the US dollar against gold. There were all these dominoes that were falling. And of course, the bank failures, bank panics, reduced world trade, agricultural output, and the Great Depression. And this was considered not only bad in and of itself, but a contributing factor to World War II. Created so much imbalance and so much irredentism, and Germany's desire to take back lands that had given up to France and Poland and elsewhere, that it contributed to World War II. So here we were in 1944, before the war was over, but already Roosevelt, FDR, and Churchill were looking past the war and said, look, we can't let this happen again. We'll win the war. They thought they would win the war by 1944. But we can't win the war and then not have a good international monetary system. We'll repeat all the blunders and errors of the 1920s and be back where we started. So they convened the Bretton Woods Conference in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at the Mount Washington Hotel for that purpose of designing the system. Now, there were about 45 or so nations present. Believe it or not, the Soviet Union, which was an ally, of course, of the US during World War II, was present. They ended up not signing the agreement.